All right, so real quick, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this chapter 15 through 17 review. Chapter 15, of course, is about Reconstruction, which I recommend before you write your DBQ on Friday that you actually rewatch the video on Reconstruction. Chapter 16 is dealing with settlement in the West and the interaction between the American government and the Native Americans. And then Chapter 17 is dealing with two things. It's dealing with the big business aspect of the Gilded Age and immigration. So let's get started. Let's go ahead and let's go through Reconstruction real quick, and just some things to remember as how we're going to rebuild the South, and what are we going to do with the millions of slaves that are now free. And so, a lot of ideas went into it. If you remember Lincoln's Reconstruction Plan, very lenient. Only 10% of the population had to swear, pledge an oath of allegiance, and ratify the 13th Amendment. After he was assassinated, Johnson's plan was a little bit more strict on the Confederates, but wasn't passed by Radical Reconstruction. And so, kind of here's an overall basic of their plan. You can pause it and kind of take a look at it. The Radical Republicans wanted to punish the South, led by Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner, which led to military reconstruction. You can see how the states were broken up into five military districts. One of the key things that was passed during Reconstruction, or at least a political success, was the 14th Amendment. Remember, the 14th Amendment is going to grant equal rights to all citizens, allowing former slaves to now become citizens. So this is going to completely overturn, if you remember, the Dred Scott decision, which allowed slavery to exist. The 14th Amendment is going to completely nullify the Dred Scott decision, and it's supposed to provide equal protection under law. It cannot nor deny any person within its jurisdiction to equal protection of the law. Now, how we interpret that in society, and one of the social and economic failures of Reconstruction, is how we might say equal protection, but that's not always identified, at least in society. The 15th Amendment is going to grant voting rights to all men. You can see this picture that we wrote the SAQ on, that shows the first voting of African Americans because of the 15th Amendment. Because of the 14th Amendment and the successes, we now kind of changed the landscape as far as voting in the South, where more African Americans are not going to participate, and it really just changed the voting patterns, and it allowed different people to run for office. You see a group of several U.S. senators that were African American: Blanche K. Bruce, Hiram Revels, 14 U.S. House Representatives, and a lot of them are going to be from the South. So that's one aspect that Reconstruction was a success, at least politically. If you remember the Scalawags and the Carpetbagger, remember I told you the name Charles Schultz, who was a well-known, was a House of Representative member who moved to the South as a carpetbagger. They're going to fight for Reconstruction and try to bring. The goal was, of course, to bring the Confederates back into the Union. They're going to, of course, refute things like sharecropping and things like that, which tried to bring African Americans back into slavery. A lot of resistance is going to hit carpetbaggers and scalawags. Remember, scalawags already lived in the South, but they're going to push for Reconstruction. So there's a lot of resistance that was built up during Reconstruction, mainly from the Ku Klux Klan and the White League. And so you're going to see this political cartoon on the test. And just remember that its goal was they wanted to restore what they call the white man's government. They wanted to redeem what we call the lost cause of the Confederates that fought heroically, and just sheer intimidation. And that's kind of what the point of this political cartoon was: is to point at the intimidation factor of the KKK and the White League. Remember, the New South is kind of a more industrialized South that's going to emphasize also education. One of the social failures that we've talked about is the aspect of sharecropping, which is basically tricking slaves back into growing crops and being in constant debt. And like I said, you can stop and take a look at this. I know I'm going fast. At the end of the day, Reconstruction is going to come to an end, mainly because the North is going to grow weary after 10 years of doing this, and they're ready to move on. And so when Rutherford B. Hayes becomes president, appointed by the House of Representatives, they decide to put it into Reconstruction. But remember, it was overwhelmingly, it was just kind of a they were ready to move on from Reconstruction. Here's some more stuff on the Lost Cause. It was a heroic crusade by the South. Now this is their, from their point of view, the defense of state rights was the primary cause of secession, not to necessarily preserve slavery. And you can kind of read what the Lost Cause was about. And so here are your failures and successes of Reconstruction, as you see them there. All right, so moving on to chapter 16, starting with the Homestead Act. The Homestead Act was 160-acre plots where people could buy up or were given land to go out, and all they had to do was cultivate the land over a time period of 5 years. Many of them are going to encounter a lot of hardships in the Midwest as they're going to begin to move back to the east. The problem with the Homestead Act is as you push west, of course, you're going to encounter Native Americans and entrench on a lot of their land. Another thing it's going to lead to is Frederick Jackson Turner's essay on the end of the frontier thesis, which basically says that soon the frontier is going to be closed off because settlers, along with barbed wire fencing, is taking away that frontier aspect of life, and that manifest destiny has pretty much come to an end. The Homestead Act is going to support the Republican values. Remember, I told you that the Republicans are going to push the Homestead Act because they want Republican voters out west, which means they have more states, which means they have more representation. Remember, when slavery ended, that three-fifths compromise ended, so the South actually are going to gain 12 representatives during that time period. So some of the Republican values, they're going to stress free soil, free labor, and free man. And of course, this supports Thomas Jefferson's vision of kind of the agrarian nation. The Transcontinental Railroad is going to be complete, I believe, in 1869 at Promontory Point. Because of this, of course, it's the same thing as we push west. We're going to encounter Native Americans, and the U.S. government's going to intervene, which is going to lead to the depletion of the buffalo, which is going to lead to the Treaty of Fort Laramie, which is going to be broken by settlers when they find gold in the Black Hills, and this leads to the Dawes Severalty Act. So a lot of effects because of the Transcontinental Railroad and because of the Homestead Act. Just a reminder that mining, farming, cattle ranching, all were economic activities that are happening in the West. Remember, the barbed wire is the one that's going to end the kind of the cattle frontier. And then, like I said, the barbed wire fence and how that closed the prairie, which is going to close kind of that frontier life and that cowboy life. Let's see here. All right. So from a Native American's point of view, just remember there are three ways that the American government thought that they can handle the Indians. One is by putting them on reservations, right? Which when they signed the Treaty of Fort Laramie, they were supposed to do that. And if you remember, the Treaty of Fort Laramie was designed to that they would each have their own claim to land. And we know that the settlers are going to break that because they go looking for gold. But overall, they hope that one day that eventually Native Americans would be assimilated into frontier life. And that's number two, is that they hope by offering them land, by offering them a church, Christianity, by offering them schooling like the Carlisle School, that they would assimilate into American population. And then the final step was, of course, extermination. And this is killing off the buffalo, taking away the Native Americans' way of life. The two big, some of the big Indian wars that happened in the Midwest, the Battle of Little Bighorn, which was actually a success of success by the Native Americans. The Last Stand was the Battle of Wounded Knee, where the Americans will win. In going back to kind of the reservations, and you see up here on the screen, They'll later pass the Dawes Severalty Act, which still actually give the Native Americans 160 acres of land from their tribal territory. What they hope to do is they hope to break up tribal identities by encouraging assimilation, by giving them their own land. Remember that Native Americans do not believe in private property, but they believe in communal living. And so they hope by breaking up the land, they would do that. And not only that, but any land that was left over was given back to the U.S. government, which, oh, by the way, happened to be land that was filled with gold. If you remember, we talked way back about Harriet Beecher Stowe and Uncle Tom's Cabin and how it brought up the atrocities of slavery. Well, no different here with A Century of Dishonor by Helen Hunt Jackson, which brings to the attention the hardships that was given to the Indians. It makes little difference where one opens up the record of the history of Indians page after page. Every year it has its dark stain. The story of one tribe is a story of all, varied only by a difference of time and place. And so you can take that quote and you know that Indians were often ignored in American history. Um, let's see here. What else? I've already talked about the Indian Wars. Big two are the Battle of Little Bighorn and Wounded Knee. So make sure you take time to take a look at that. Remember, as a response to the Little Bighorn, the American government is going to push more military into the West, and so that kind of really pushes the violence more upon the Native Americans. And it was also, going back into history, if you go all the way back to King Philip's War, as Puritans wanted to push west, the Indian Removal Act in 1830, and then the completely ignoring of the Worcester versus Georgia Act by Andrew Jackson and pushing Indian west. So the Indian story has long been a long story of oppression that's going to actually lead even into current day today. And so here's a kind of a list of the kind of Indian policy that the U.S. adopted, and you can kind of pause and you can take a look at that as well. Um, I've already covered all this, so if there's any questions on this, feel free to ask. But Wounded Knee. Oh, so here's Frederick Jackson Turner's frontier thesis. The frontier is meeting the point between savagery and civilization. That's almost completely done. The frontier used to define American identity, but now that frontier is gone. And in 1890, after Wounded Knee, the American frontier was now closed. This is going to turn into imperialism, at least in the United States. Right. All right. So let's get into the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age was coined by Mark Twain, and some of the things to think about is how business owners and entrepreneurs continue to make a ton of money while the poor immigrants, whether it's immigrants, newly freed slaves, or just poor whites, uneducated. There's a big gap in between the rich and the poor. We spent a lot of time talking about the captains of industry or robber barons. So kind of make sure the fundamentals of capitalism that stars, laissez-faire, where the government is hands off. We believe in private enterprise. We believe in competition for healthy economy. We believe in private property. We have a right to make a profit, and the consumers can choose what they want to buy. And so whether it's Cornelius Vanderbilt and his railroads, or if it's Andrew Carnegie and steel, make sure you know the difference between vertical integration and horizontal integration. The Bessemer process is going to create steel. A lot of people are going to move to the city to look for opportunities, including immigrants, because that's where the jobs are. The political machines, which we haven't officially covered yet, but we've already talked a lot about them. That's where they're going to be given jobs in place of their votes. Make sure you know that because of the poor labor conditions, that a lot of labor movements are going to start, and you'll read more about that in chapter 18. Make sure you know John D. Rockefeller is the holder of Standard Oil trust and monopoly, and he built his empire with horizontal integration. So over here on the right is Rockefeller's horizontal integration, where you take of independent oil refineries and create one big oil company. Whereas Carnegie is going to start at the bottom and work all his way up. Now, he didn't own things with the meat industry, but he did play a part in, of course, the U.S. Steel. So make sure you know the difference between vertical, horizontal. Make sure you know that Rockefeller was horizontal and Carnegie was vertical. So how do you how do you enforce it? Well, the idea was to pass the Sherman Antitrust Act, which should have put a cap on monopolies. However, it wasn't enforced. It was more used to enforce labor unions. And as these corporations are going to create these trust companies and these holding companies, and you can kind of see how these companies are going to fall under a board of trustees and one big symbolic company. Standard Oil Trust, of course, is one of the biggest monopolies during this time, and actually, we won't go after it until William Howard Taft becomes president of the United States in 1908. But you can see that some of these political cartoons are pointing to how Standard Oil has control of the government, manipulates how they manipulate the government. And no bigger than this political cartoon of the bosses of the Senate. You will see this on the test. Make sure you know that obviously a lot of these trusts are going to be very involved in the Senate decision making, and so a lot of times the senators were corrupt. And if you don't know at this time, but they were appointed by their governors. There was no election, and it wasn't until the 17th Amendment was passed when the senators were directly elected. And so what you have here is you have big money that's in the pockets of these senators making decisions, and you've seen political cartoons of Standard Oil and Rockefeller kind of having the government in the palm of their hands. And this is very similar to what happened during the 1980s and 90s when Reagan was president and Bush, where a lot of senators were corrupt because at the hands of big business and so on. And so here are some of the political cartoons that you've seen dealing with Rockefeller and his involvement in the government. And then a lot of these monopolies will turn into a consolidation of companies into trust and holding companies. And here's some examples. AT&T is a big one. General Electric are still alive and well today. All right, so the last thing we're going to go through is immigration, and I've talked about it in class, but there's nothing on the YouTube videos about immigration. But the difference between old immigration and new immigrations. In the 1840s, you had Germans and Irish came over to America. That there was a lot of nativist sentiments. Political parties were organized. If you remember the Order of the Star Spangled Banner, otherwise known as the American Party, otherwise known as the Know Nothing Party. And then here we are in the 1890s, and you have a slew of immigrants coming in from both Europe and Asia. And so from the Europeans, the new immigrants are going to be mainly from Southern Europe and Eastern Europe. And when they come to America, they're going to land in Ellis Island. They're going to get processed, and they'll become U.S. citizens. They're looking for opportunity. Many of them are going to move to the Midwest and the Northeast because that's where the cities are, because of big time industrialization, and they are going to look for factory jobs for unskilled workers. They quickly need to be assimilated into America. When they go there, they're going to blend their culture with American culture, but they're also going to live kind of in their own ethnic communities. And we've talked about the different neighborhoods in New York. However, if you're Chinese, you're going to enter through Angel Island. I think I have Angel Island here somewhere. There's Ellis Island. And Angel Island in San Francisco is much harder to get through Angel Island than it was than Ellis Island, mainly because of discrimination against the Chinese. And you can see a detention center here at Angel Island. And some of them lived on Angel Island for years and years before they were allowed into the United States. All right. So that's just a quick review over chapter 15 through 17. Take time to study. If you have any questions, I know time is getting short, but hopefully this will at least help you at least on the exam.